Questions? Deputy Leader.
First question, Mr Speaker, is to the Deputy Premier as Minister for Planning. Why is the Torrens building being included in the sale of the State Administration precinct when it was specifically excluded when the sale of the precinct was first proposed and the market sounding conducted?
Deputy Premier.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question. I suspect this is a matter which is more properly directed to the Treasurer, and I don't know off the top of my head what the answer to that is, but I'll try and ascertain whether Renewal SA does have any information about that, and I'll get back to her.
Deputy Leader.
Further question to the Minister for Planning. Under the state government's plan to sell the Torrens building and then lease it back, who will be liable for the paying of the lease? Will that be the government or the businesses that are currently operating in the building?
Deputy Premier.
Well, likewise, I don't have any present knowledge about the detail of that matter, but I will seek to find out. I do seem to recall that the tender process and the general market process was something that was driven from Treasury, if I recall correctly. So it may be that, as I said before, Treasury may be the appropriate agency to provide that answer, but I will take it on notice.
Deputy Leader.
And again to the Minister for Planning. Who will maintain the leases for the Carnegie Mellon and Torrens University now that the government plans to sell the Torrens building in Light Square? Victoria Square, sorry.
Victoria Square, isn't it?
It is in Victoria Square, it's still there, yes. Look, again, off the top of my head, I'm not able to assist the Deputy Leader with an answer to that question, although my assumption would be that there would be no disturbance of whatever the prevailing arrangements are between those institutions and the government. But I'll have to check that and I'll get back to her.
Supplementary.
If I might just have a supplementary, sir. To the Minister, whoever has responsibility, I think the Minister for Corrections has the responsibility for the Minister in another place, the Honourable Gail Gago, as to inquire as to her knowledge in respect of the leasing arrangements and any benefits for Carnegie Mellon and Torrens University.
Take that question on notice as the others have been taken.
Member for MacKillop.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for the Health. Given that the cost of ambulance inter-hospital transfers are currently covered... Sorry, I'll start that again. Given the cost of ambulance inter-hospital transfers, given that the cost, are currently covered by SA Health, will the cost...
Member for Colton is called to order.
Choking.
Member for MacKillop. The member for Colton's attire is not a fit topic for question time. He is not responsible to the House.
Not usually.
The member for MacKillop.
We've just spent 2 days debating a bill in which jewellery and attire were the subject of criminal prosecution. It certainly is.
Member for MacKillop.
Might be his colours.
Sir, I think I'll start yet again. Given that the cost of ambulance inter-hospital transfers are currently covered by SA Health, will the cost of the additional travel time of ambulances diverted past the downgraded emergency departments be picked up by SA Health?
Good question.
Minister.
No, we've certainly put more budget provision in for ambulance service as part of our costings of Transforming Health, because we will expect that there would be some additional ambulance activity. But in any case, I'll check out the costing structures for ambulances. But if I'm correct, I'm pretty sure it's a flat fee. It doesn't just So or at least the distances would be so negligible, it certainly wouldn't have an impact in any case on the amount someone was charged. So I guess the short way to answer the question would be I would not expect there to be any additional cost to someone who is being transported by ambulance to a hospital by the fact that they might have to go a little bit further. I'd be very, very surprised. I'll double check that, but I could pretty much reassure the House that there would not be any additional cost because someone was taken past the closest emergency department to go to the correct emergency department to be able to give them the appropriate treatment.
Member for MacKillop.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Again, my next question is to the Minister for Health. On the 24th of February, the Minister told the House that in answer to a question who will pay ambulance transfers from Noarlunga's walk-in clinic to the Flinders Medical Centre, the Minister responded that it is an inter-hospital transport and in the normal course of events that would be covered by SA Health. In reality, an inter-hospital transfer is only covered where a patient has been admitted to the hospital. So what is the circumstance where somebody turns up at the ED of, say, Noarlunga after it's been downgraded and then taken by ambulance from there to Flinders Medical Centre when they haven't been admitted to the Noarlunga hospital?
Well, let's be quite clear, that's happening at the moment and has for a long time. People have been transferred by ambulance from the Noarlunga Hospital to the Flinders Medical Centre. There's nothing new in that. That's something that has always happened. I will double check, but I'm pretty sure that when someone is transferred in such circumstances that they are not charged for that ambulance trip, that's a cost which is borne by SA Health and would continue to be borne. But as I say, there's nothing new in that. People are transferred by ambulance from emergency department every day in South Australia, including from country hospitals and from emergency departments that aren't able to give them the appropriate treatment. That's something that is the case at the moment. There's nothing new in that.
Member for Hartley. Oh, supplementary.
For absolute clarity, if a patient turns up at the Noarlunga emergency department and are told immediately that they should be presenting to the Flinders emergency department, are not admitted, are not even triaged, but are then put in an ambulance, is the cost of that service, that ambulance service, covered by SA Health?
Minister.
That would just never happen. I mean, you're never ever going to have a circumstance where someone is so seriously ill that they present to the Noarlunga emergency department and the nurse doesn't even look at them. I mean, that's just ridiculous. They're never ever going to do that. They're never going to say, you're so sick, we can't even look at you. They're going to give you some initial treatment. They're going to take you, generally I imagine, they would take you into the resuscitation bay and attempt to stabilise you before you were transferred. I cannot envisage there ever being a circumstance where a decision was taken that someone had to be transferred because the emergency department they'd presented to wasn't able to look after them, where that they wouldn't even be looked at. And in any case, unless there was an ambulance on the premise that was ready to go, there would be some time before an ambulance presented to transfer that person. And again, in those circumstances, they're not going to leave you sitting there while you're having your heart attack or your stroke or you're bleeding to death and refuse to give you any sort of treatment.
Member for Hartley.
Sir, my question is to the Minister for Health. Considering that a 2011 Heart Foundation survey of South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales patients found that for 20% of the patients presenting to hospital with suspected coronary problems who did not come by ambulance, cost was a key reason for not doing so. What modelling has the government done on the impact of its emergency department changes on health outcomes of the uninsured?
Minister.
I think, did the member for Hartley say this was something that was done in Victoria? Did I hear him correctly? Or were we talking about a South Australian survey? Okay. Well, look, I'm not familiar with the survey that was done. More than happy to have a look at it and see what relevance it has. But there can be no doubt if you are having a heart attack, the best place for you, other than obviously an emergency department, is in the back of an ambulance, because your treatment will begin as soon as the ambulance picks you up, and often paramedics are basically able to diagnose that you're having a heart attack, notify the emergency department that they're taking you to, that they have a heart attack patient in the back of the ambulance, and so the emergency department is ready and waiting for them. Now, that doesn't happen if you self-present, and so your outcome is often going to be worse than if you called an ambulance. So we'd always encourage people to call an ambulance. Well, indeed, it is dangerous, certainly dangerous to drive yourself, and certainly not recommended to get someone else to drive you if you suspect you're having a heart attack. Now, lots of heart attacks are able to be relatively easily diagnosed with an ECG. There are some patients who are having a heart attack where it's not so clear that it's a heart attack, and they require further tests that I think take some hours. Noarlunga Hospital is able to deal with those patients. They take care of those patients. They do the relevant tests to determine whether it's a heart attack that they're having, because I think these tests can take some hours. And then if it's confirmed that they're having a heart attack, only then do they transfer them up to Flinders Medical Centre. But we encourage people to get an ambulance and not to self-present if they're in any doubt as to whether or not they're having a heart attack.
Member for Bright.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. Can the Minister explain why, when a 2-kilometre stretch of Brighton Road was resurfaced between Brighton and Seacliff Park, only one side of the road was resurfaced, leaving the side which was arguably in poorer condition unimproved?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Bright for his question. He is nothing if not assiduous in raising issues which are of concern to his community, and I'm glad to receive the question. Often I find, Mr Speaker, that question time can be tense and nerve-wracking, but one thing that does help is the warm, benevolent, bovine-like mooing that I get from the member for Carville when a question is put to us, Mr Speaker. That tends to settle things down.
The Minister will withdraw and apologise for the bovine-like mooing of the member for Carville, because it is, well, there is that, but it has also always been unparliamentary to characterise another member as an animal.
I unreservedly withdraw and apologise to the member
I'm waiting for the
Carville.
withdrawal and the apology first.
I unreservedly withdraw and apologise to the member for Carville, Mr Speaker.
Deputy Leader, point of order.
Is in relation to the matters of which are the purview of the Minister. His emotional state is not a matter of ministerial interest or relevance to this debate.
Well, that's a superfluous point of order. Minister.
Indeed, Mr Speaker, thank you very much. As the member raised in his question, these matters may well be arguable which side of the road was in more need of resurfacing if there were pavement defects in them. As I've often corresponded with members on both sides of the chamber when assessments are made of road surfaces, assessments are often made for safety requirements first and foremost, rather than the perceived benefit to ride improvements from resurfacing works. But I'm happy to look into this particular matter and provide the member with a response.
The member for Mitchell.
Thank you, sir. My question is also to the Minister for Transport. Given the government spent $2 million on a study drawings of the train overpass at the Oaklands Crossing, when does the government plan to begin work on this project?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Mitchell for his interest in this particular matter, as I note his very keen interest that he has raised on numerous occasions within this chamber, Mr Speaker. Yes, a study was done some years ago, off the top of my head, 2011, perhaps 2012, which indicated a solution in the order of, I think, $210 million off the top of my head. I don't have that in front of me, but of a very significant magnitude. The government released before the election, Mr Speaker, a draft integrated transport and land use plan which spoke about a series of transport improvements across the central Adelaide, broader metropolitan Adelaide, and of course across the rest of the state over a series of timeframes. within 5 years, 5 to 15 years and 15 to 30 years, Mr Speaker. And while the Oaklands Crossing was identified as a transport issue that needs attention, it wasn't identified as an issue which needed attention in that most immediate time category, Mr Speaker. That's been the position of the government. I reiterated that indeed in radio interviews when I first became elected. And I noticed, Mr Speaker, that despite there being newly elected MPs from the other side of the House who reside in that part of town and also represent communities interested in that particular crossing, there was no commitment or indeed an intention to take the matter any further in the transport policies, or lack thereof, that were taken to the election by the opposition.
Point of order.
The Minister's characterisation as he sees another party's policy is certainly debate.
Well, look, I'll listen to what the Minister has to say, as long as he's not excessive in making Her Majesty's opposition the topic.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, a manifest lack of transport policies presented to the electorate at the last state election by those members sitting opposite, and of course a blank space when it came to the Oaklands Crossing.
The opposition is irrelevant to the question. The question was, when is this project going to advance?
Indeed. The Liberal Party has not been in office since early 2002.
Order, Mr Speaker. And further point of order.
Further point of order.
The member was Mr Alan Sibbins.
Minister, please get on with it.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the Deputy Leader for her interjection as well. She, much more neatly than I, has drawn the link between transport policy, the opposition and irrelevance better than I could.
I believe the Minister is responding to
interjections,
which is, of course,
well, there's two remedies to that,
orders.
isn't it? First, the Minister doesn't respond to the interjections. The second is you don't utter them. The Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think my point's been made.
Member for Davenport. Supplementary, Member for Mitchell.
Thank you, if I can. Yes, and I appreciate the Minister giving us figures which we've been looking for a while of $200 million for the overpass, which is the first time that figure has been bandied around. But given that the pictures showed rail over road, is that still the intention of the government, to put rail over road?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think there's been quite an amount of discussion both before and since the election about the Oaklands Crossing, the study that was done, the solution which was proffered, which the member for Mitchell has just raised, a rail overpass over the road junction, and of course the cost. And there's never been any secrecy or withholding of that information either from the opposition or from the public. So I'm interested to have that characterised as it has been by the member. Mr Speaker, I was asked in late March or April of last year about what the government's approach to the Oaklands Crossing was. I reiterated the points I made earlier about the fact that we had identified it as an issue in the transport network. We had identified that it needed attention. A study had been done, costings had been made, it had been factored into a 30-year transport plan to upgrade many of the transport needs of the South Australian community across the state, and also what the timeline was. I also made reference in that interview, Mr Speaker, that if there were alternatives to alleviate the difficulties that motorists were having, particularly in the peak hour, with navigating that intersection, we would be happy to consider them. But until those alternatives are presented, until they are worked through, our position is that we have factored it into our broader 30-year plan to improve transport infrastructure across South Australia.
Supplementary.
Given that as part of this project, or as part of a separate project but tied in, is the re-sleepering of that bend of the rail line, and the re-sleepering project is complete, yet the re-sleepering there has not taken place, there are still wooden sleepers instead of the concrete sleepers. Will residents have to wait for the 30-year version of the intersection upgrade, or will the re-sleepering happen before then?
Minister.
Well, I'm interested in drawing the two issues of whether a sleeper is concrete or wooden, and the delays experienced by motorists with boom gates coming down. I'm not sure that they are directly linked, Mr Speaker. I think the issue more is that there is an adjacent railway station trains enter a particular section of the rail network, which triggers the signalling system, dropping the boom gates, making sure that until those trains are cleared of that section, the boom gates remain down. If there's an alternative proposition, Mr Speaker, that somebody, whether on the opposition benches or elsewhere, wants to put forward as to how this issue is to be resolved, I am all ears. But we have presented a solution, we have costed the solution, we have factored it into our 30-year transport plan. All of these things, Mr Speaker, further steps than the absolute zero commitment that we've had from those sitting opposite to resolving this issue.
The member for Devonport.
Thank you, sir. My question is to the Minister for Disabilities. Can the Minister inform the House as to why it is expected to take up to 65 weeks to complete the upgrade of 4 lifts at Highgate Park, formerly known as the Julia Farr Centre?
Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr Speaker, the matter was raised with me some time ago. We had to get necessary approvals because the money actually comes from a trust, which is actually set up for the purpose of looking after people in that building. The trust still exists.
Called to order.
The trust still exists, and we need to go through the process of getting release of the funds for the trust to do that. My understanding is that, the latest advice I got was that the tenders had been called for or about to go out, and I anticipate those that they'll be replaced as soon as, or not only they'll be replaced and repaired as soon as possible. But the exact figures, exact details, I'll get for you.
Member for Devonport.
Sir, so does the Minister believe a 65-week turnaround time is an acceptable turnaround time, as advised to the residents and families and carers meeting in May of the Julia Farr Centre?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, whatever the legal requirements will be required, I'll adhere to those. If that's the time required, that's so be it. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that there is a law to be followed and I will follow the law.
Member for Devonport.
Sir, my question is to the Minister for Transport and Infrastructure. Will the Minister advise the House as to when the road management plan will be acted upon to ensure the safety of residents of Blackwood and surrounding suburbs? And with your leave, sir, and the leave of the House, I'll explain. A recent study by insurer AAMI has found that Main Road Blackwood to be the 5th most dangerous road in Adelaide.
Minister for Transport.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the issue of the road management plan for this particular area that the member for Devonport refers to was the subject of some debate in the lead up to the last by-election that we had for Devonport. And indeed, when it was claimed by the Leader of the Opposition that unless the government duplicated parts of the road network leading from the metropolitan area up the hills face, up towards that area, Mr Speaker, that people were being put in danger from bushfires, Mr Speaker. Reprehensible advice, which of course cuts across and is in conflict with the advice that we get from our police and emergency services on fire danger days. Be that as it may, Mr Speaker, the road management plan, which didn't seek to address those issues which the Leader of the Opposition was erroneously claiming during the Devonport by-election, those road management plans are factored into all of the transport needs and improvements that we have. We will allocate our transport budget to meet the needs of the roads according to priority. Those roadworks, as well as other roadworks around the state, will be prioritised in the usual way.
Supplementary, member for Devonport.
Thank you, sir. Given that the February 2015 update of the plan is unfunded, when will funding be allocated to the Blackwood Road Management Plan?
Minister.
I'm not sure there's much more to add, Mr Speaker, from the last 50 to 100 words of
Very
my previous
well.
answer.
Member for Mount Gambier.
Thank you, sir. My question is to the Minister for Health. Can the Minister explain to the House why orthopaedic surgeons in metropolitan Adelaide have had their contracts rolled over for 12 months, yet the 2 orthopaedic surgeons in the Mount Gambier Hospital have only been offered 3 months?
Minister.
Happy to get a briefing. I'm not sure it would, the personal employment contracts of individuals in the Department of Health, something really should be canvassed in here, but more than happy to get in contact with the member for Mount Gambier and get a report to him.
The member for Hammond.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Transport and Infrastructure. What percentage of road safety fencing contracts are going to South Australian contractors?
Minister.
I'd have to look into that and provide the member with an answer.
Member for Hammond.
Better get back on my feet. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. How many South Australian farmers have had a drought concession loan approved? And with your leave and that of the House, sir, I will explain. In Victoria, 90% of assessed applications for drought concessional loans to date have been approved.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And this was a matter that was raised at the ministerial forum just a few weeks ago in Sydney with the Federal Minister for Agriculture, Barnaby Joyce, and other state and territory ministers who all share the concern that probably not enough people in any of the states are getting the sort of loans through that are being offered. And there are a number of different reasons for that. We're looking at other states and territories to see if there's anything that's being done differently here than in the other states. At this stage, it doesn't appear so, although Victoria does do one part of the process before a second stage, which is in reverse to what we and the other states and territories do. But you know, we want as many people to get that funding as possible, and so does the federal minister. So he's having his department having a look. It's the federal government who provides the money. It's the federal government that sets the rules of handing out that money, and it's up to the individual states and territories to administer that. So Minister Joyce and myself are keen to make sure that as many farmers as possible can get that money. But what we also know is that one of the things that you have to be able to do is prove that you've got a business case where that money can be repaid, which involves you going to your banks. And in many instances, we understand that when the banks actually sit down with the farmers, they say, well, we can actually match the conditions and the interest rates that is being offered in the government concessional loan. So in many cases, people don't go on with their application and they accept a deal put to them by their banks. The bank's happy because they get to keep a farm customer, and the farmer's happy because they're getting exactly the same deal that would have been offered by the concessional loan scheme for the assistance. And so I think we're seeing some people who aren't entering into the drought loan assistance scheme because they're actually staying with their banks who are matching the deal that we put on offer.
Supplementary, Member for Hammond.
Are people getting frustrated with the government, Minister, because there is stricter criteria and more forms to fill out for South Australian farmers to apply for this funding than interstate farmers?
Minister.
Thank you again to the member for Hammond for the question. There might be frustrations with the forms, but it's the same forms that you've got to fill out in every state. As I mentioned before, in Victoria, you have to go and do your business case after you've been given the tick by the government. Here, you have to do that beforehand. So I guess there's some more work to be done before you go through the approvals process, as set out by the federal government and as administered by the state government. So, well, it was slightly different. As I said in my first answer, is that every other state and territory, as South Australia does, puts that part of the process first. In Victoria, they put it second. Does that have an influence on how many people get the loans? I don't think it does. I've looked at the percentage of people who have applied for these loans and how many people have got them in each state and territory, and we're on it seems to me that we're on around the average when you work it out, the amount of applications we've had compared to the number of applications that have been approved.
The member for Hyson. Supplementary, Member for Hammond.
Well, can the Minister confirm that the criteria is quite different from the other states, and that for people to apply for this funding program have only got 12 days to apply?
Minister.
I haven't heard that 12-day figure before, but I'm happy to look into it. But well, I think the scheme was extended by the federal government through till the end of June. So these loans have been out there. Well, these loans have been out there for a number of months now. So it's up to the federal government is the government that's extended it out to June 30. So, you know, okay, I don't think any farmer in this state who's in duress is getting anywhere by us sitting in here arguing the point. What I can say, well, we are helping them, but we have to do it in conjunction with the federal government. And the federal minister and I have a very good working relationship, and we are working on it. As I said, it's a situation that every state and territory finds itself in. The federal minister wants to put more money out there. We all want to put more money in there. The federal minister assured us a few weeks ago in Sydney at our ministerial forum that he'll get his officers to go through and have a review and see what needs to be tweaked. We all want to get more money out there, and I think it's not doing it any better than South Australia is. And we're hearing the same thing from all of the states and territories who are around the table. I mean, I was at the forum, and every minister said that they would like to get more money out to the people in their states and territories. So the federal government is having a look at the process of how these approvals are being handled at this stage. We're quite happy. We're having a look at it at a state level to see if there's any way we can improve it as well. We know that people have an issue, and we're trying to get to the bottom of it to see if we can make it any better. But it is federally funded. The rules about who gets the money and how they get the money is set out by the federal government, and then we administer that. We can't go and give out money that isn't in compliance with the rules that the federal government have given us, or we as a state are then liable to pay that money back to the federal government. And that's not something that we want to do with the scarce resources and taxpayers' money that we have in our state. We want to help every possible farmer that we can, but we have to do it in the proper way.
Supplementary, member for Hammond.
Well, with the minister's answer that South Australian farmers actually have to make a business case and do a lot more work to get approved for this funding, will he give them 3 months extra to apply for this funding and apply to the federal government for that? But if the federal funding isn't allocated, will the minister be required to pay that back to the federal treasury?
Minister.
Thank you again, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Hammond. You've actually misquoted me there. I didn't say there was more work and more forms to be filled out by South Australia. Well, at some stage, whether you're in Victoria or South Australia, to get these federal funds, you have to prove up your business case. You have to be able to convince the people who are handing out the money, which is the federal government, that you have the capability of paying back the money. One thing that Minister Joyce has made clear is that if people don't have the capacity to pay back a loan, then it's not a loan, it's a handout, and he's not interested in giving out handouts. So, as I said, we're working on this issue with the federal government. They're taking a look at the scheme at a national level. We're taking a look at it at a state level, and we welcome any contributions that you can make in feeding in some background about people who may have missed out, because we want to get them the money. Minister Joyce wants to give them the money. So if you've got any details at all, I encourage anyone over there to... No, I'd like to get... It's not our money. We're just administering the scheme. Well, we don't get the money. We administer the scheme. It's federal money that then goes to the farmers. Look, if anyone over there, please, has any examples of people... Mr Speaker, can I please ask you to stop the Deputy Leader for interrupting? I mean, this is a serious matter. This is a serious matter that deserves more than the interjections of the opposition.
Yes, I do call the Deputy Leader to order. Supplementary. I haven't finished.
Thank you, and thank you very much. Thank you very much for your protection, because this is a really important issue. And what I'm asking is for anyone on that side of the House who can bring me examples of farmers who have applied and who have missed out. I would love for us to be able to case manage each of those ones. We want to get the money out there. Minister Joyce wants to get the money out there. This is a serious issue for South Australians, but we're not going to solve them. We're not going to help a single farmer by playing politics with it in here.
The member for Mount Gambier.
Supplementary, sir.
Well, no, we've run out of supplementaries. It'll just have to be a fresh question.
My question is to the Minister for Agriculture as well. So just to be clear, Minister, are you going to extend the deadline, or are we going to lose $35 million to farmers of South Australia?
Minister.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Mount Gambier for the question. The money's not ours, the program isn't ours, we administer it. If it's to be an extension, it needs to come from the federal government. They've extended it out to June 30.
Member for Hyson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communities and Social Inclusion. Will the Minister or her department pay compensation to my constituent, a bus driver, who has been without a wage since the 10th of June due to her department's failure to process his application for the necessary clearance to work with children? With your leave, sir, and that of the House, I'll briefly explain. My constituent has been a bus driver for some years. On the 7th of April this year, he lodged the necessary application, which was a renewal for clearance to continue to work with children. This was as soon as he received the relevant notification. More than 2 months later, in the absence of the clearance, even though he's never committed any offence which would put his ability to work with children in doubt, he's been required to cease driving the bus until the clearance certificate is received. Numerous contacts by my office with the Minister's office have failed to overcome the delay, and my constituent has now not earned any wage since the 10th of June.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm not quite sure whether the member for Hyson is referring to a bus driver who is engaged by one of the 3 bus contractors who drives Adelaide Metro fleets.
The Deputy Leader is warned.
I realise that the lack of detail provided in the member for Hyson's question is of some concern to the Deputy Leader. We have taken...
No, if the Deputy Leader continues, she'll be removed under the sessional order. I'm not having another bogus point of order. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the Minister and I have been at pains to make clear to different employee groups, whether they are bus drivers, whether they are taxi drivers, or indeed whether they're engaged in other work which requires the different levels of clearance, different levels of clearance to give the public the level of safety and comfort that they would expect. It's an important risk mitigation measure. The Minister has certainly improved and provided additional resources into her department, and the Transport Department has also made it very clear.
Finnis is called to order.
Has made it very clear to the different driver groups about how they can also assist in the process by making sure that their applications are being presented in a timely. And I must say, Mr Speaker, the
member for Hyson is warned. The member for Schubert's called to order.
And as many members on both sides of the chamber would be aware, there have been instances, certainly at the outset of this issue, where there have been clearances which have been delayed. And there have also been instances when people have contacted their local members of parliament. They have made assertions that they have
Member for Flinders is called to order.
They have done everything they possibly can to make sure...
Member for Hyson is warned a second and final time.
They have done everything they can to try and get their application in on time. And of course, when either my office or the Minister's office or our respective departments has investigated the matter, unfortunately, on occasion, that hasn't proven to be the case. Now, whether that's the case in this instance or not, that will only be borne out once this matter is investigated. I'm sure both I and the Minister responsible are happy to investigate this particular matter if the member for Hyson can provide sufficient detail to us.
Supplementary,
Speaker,
member for Hyson.
And in asking this supplementary, I go back to the very thrust of the question I asked in the first place. Will the Minister indicate whether there's compensation going to be paid to my constituent who is now losing his wages as a result of this delay? And can I say that there have been email and telephone contacts...
No, you can't say. Actually, Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. No, that's not the practice.
Member for Hartley.
My question is to the Minister for Planning. When will the water recycling system at Lockyer Park in Campbelltown be fixed, completed and made ready for use by the residents, my constituents, who have been waiting for it for years?
Good question. When?
Deputy Premier.
I will seek the answer to that important question from those who know, and I'll get back to the member.
Member for Hartley.
To the Minister for Health. Will the government install a hybrid suite in the new Royal Adelaide Hospital, and if so, when?
Minister.
The hybrid suites weren't really a big thing when the planning of the Royal Adelaide Hospital was done many, many years ago. They have really come into their own in the last 2 or 3 years. Certainly the widespread usage, and there is no doubt that there are enormous benefits to be had from a hybrid suite. We are very fortunate because of the planning and the way the new Royal Adelaide Hospital has been built that we will have the flexibility we need to make sure that the hospital is able to easily adapt to new technologies as they present themselves. And I do hope that this question from the member for Hartley is a break from the opposition that we've had from the Liberal Party in this state to the new Royal Adelaide Hospital ever since it was first mooted. In fact, it's pleasing to actually get a question implicit in which is the idea that a new hospital is a good thing.
This is going to be a bogus point of order, so I advise the member for Morialta not to make it. The member for Finnis. Supplementary.
To the Minister for Health, can the Minister tell the House whether the anti-vibration technology that is going to be or is being installed in the technical suites, aka the surgical suites at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, are they going to be sufficient to stop the vibration from the trains interfering with surgery in those suites?
Minister.
I'm going to go out on a real limb here and say yes.
Member for
Supplementary. Is the Minister aware that the Belair train line, which is the closest train line to the new Royal Adelaide Hospital, was not functioning when the technical investigation was undertaken to install the anti-vibration technology, and it may not be sufficient?
Minister.
I'll get a report, but I know that surgeons have been through the new Royal Adelaide Hospital, through the operating suites, and I have had nothing but praise, and certainly no one has raised with me that the vibrations from the trains are going to cause any problem. I have to say the great thing about the new Royal Adelaide Hospital is it's earthquake-proof. So I think a few passing trains aren't going to cause a problem.
We wouldn't want to see the Minister of Health lose his job because of the vibe.
Right. Talking about vibration and noise, Mr Speaker, a further supplementary. Is the quadruple glazing that's been fitted around the Royal Adelaide Hospital rooms around the helipad, is that sufficient to stop the vibration and noise from the helicopters, and did it cost $30 million?
Minister.
Well, I would again go out on a limb and say yes, but of course I'll double check. With regard to the cost of the quadruple glazing, I'll happily get a report back, but of course that cost would have been borne by the consortium as part of the PPP.
The member for Finnis.
Thank you, sir. My question is to the Minister for Health. Why has the agreement between Country Health SA, Kangaroo Island Medical Centre been revoked? With your leave now the House, so I'll explain. Country Health SA and the Kangaroo Island Medical Centre previously had an agreement whereby the KI Medical Centre doctors were remunerated by Country Health SA for all patients, irrespective of their Medicare status. KI doctors are now attending as called by Country Health, but are not getting paid for non-Medicare patients.
Minister.
I'll have to get a report back, happily get back to the member for Finnis on that. I have been spoken to about an issue with the Kangaroo Island practice, but I'll double check and get back to the member for Finnis.
He's going to seize on Finnis, member for Finnis.
Thank you, sir. My question is again to the Minister for Health. Why has the Kangaroo Island Medical Centre not received any response from the Department of Health to the offer made by a GP with credentials in obstetrics who expressed interest in assisting with services on the island in February this year? No response at all.
Minister. I'll happily get a report back to the member for Finnis.